Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Gagan, and welcome to MainStreetMediaUtah.com's podcast. I'm part of the Wellness Crusaders, and I'm actually quite honored today. I'm going to be joined by Paul Moore and Jim Gagan, and we're going to talk about the importance of the Second Amendment when it comes to Utah. So I definitely am a Second Amendment girl. I love the right to carry. I'm probably not as fluent as Jim and Paul, so I'm going to leave that conversation to them. But before we get started, it is my honor today to be interviewing Paul Moore. A little bit about Paul Moore is he is a resident of Wasatch County. He is a United States Marine, and as Leighton says, once a Marine, always a Marine. He is a former U.S. diplomat for the United States Department State, and you could correct me if I'm wrong on that. A former deputy sheriff for the Police Service and Corrections. He's a former state trooper, former senior national sales manager for Brinks, founder of a security company here to help protect residents and commercial business owners in the Heber Valley. He has worked private security for celebrities, dignitaries, and VIPs. He is a conservative. He is a Christian. He is a Republican. He is a husband to his wife, Tammy, and his one son. So Paul, welcome to Main Street Media Utah. Again, I'm really honored. I think I might be your first interview.
Well, yeah, probably. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Oh, so why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, I think the latter part of what you said is the most important. I'm a husband and a father. I'm a man of faith. I count myself as a man of faith, a Christian. I believe in a creative God, and I think that's very significant and important. As a matter of fact, our founding fathers used those very principles when they crafted our Constitution and they started this country. It's a very significant thing, and it's a major part of my life. I have one son, a wife, and I'm here, and it's an honor.
Well, we're quite excited. So one of the things that is most passionate to your heart being a resident of Utah, what is that?
Well, this is a beautiful area, Lori. I mean, I can't go any place and it never escapes me, the beauty, the mountains. But what makes this area very significant for me is the people and their hearts. This is one of the greatest places on God's green earth right here, and I just absolutely adore this place, the people, particularly Wasatch County. I don't know if I'd be as comfortable in Salt Lake City, but I love it here. This is a great place to raise a family. It's just a great community, and it's getting better every day. We've done some things we'll talk about that have really enhanced Wasatch County, and so I'm excited to get into some of those topics, and I'm sure we'll touch some of those today, but it's just a beautiful area.
All right. Well, we are going to start our talk then on Second Amendment in Utah with you and Jim Gagan.
Very nice. Well, I'm sure that all your guests and people tuning in will find this very informative and interesting. I am a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I think it's very significant. And it's been interpreted different ways, and we'll get into some of that stuff, particularly how that all applies to Utah. And it's a very significant thing, and it's a right that most people in this country don't enjoy. And I believe it is important. And so we always have to be standing up for our rights, because when we relinquish our rights, we seldom ever get them back. And so it's very significant. I'm very glad that Jim Gagan is here to help me talk about the Second Amendment.
What are your thoughts on it, Paul?
Oh, man, you just opened Pandora's box now. I have many thoughts on the Second Amendment. First of all, I think it's one of our most precious rights. And the reason I feel that way is if you look back through history, Why did our founding fathers place so much emphasis on the Second Amendment? The only place in the Constitution where it says these rights shall not be infringed is, in fact, the Second Amendment. And if you look at their circumstances, they were, in effect, running from a tyrannical government. And they understood that governments, when they want to control the people, one of the first actions they take is they disarm the citizens. And so they wanted to set us up for success, and they did that very well by enumerating that right in our Constitution and making it very clear. I believe the Constitution, for the most part, is very plain. It was worded in its time to be easily understood, and it very clearly says these rights shall not be infringed. Now, there's different interpretations, but the Supreme Court over our history has time and time again stood up for certain principles, that the Second Amendment is not an absolute, unfettered right. Government has a right to ensure that we don't have mentally ill people, as an example, out there carrying firearms. We don't need that. And so there are some safety things in place that are appropriate. However, it is one of our most precious rights. And for that reason, it has to be protected. There's a fine line. And like I said, when we relinquish our rights, we seldom get them back. And the Second Amendment is a right that needs to be protected. And they go too far. And amazingly enough, Jim, is they couch these things under safety reasons. Concealed handgun, it's a safety reason. We want to protect you, want to keep you safe, and they go way too far with it. That stuff doesn't need to happen. So we can talk about some of those things, particularly in Utah and the laws here. And a perfect example of that is, and credit to Utah, is you're allowed to carry a firearm concealed or open without a concealed handgun permit. However, if you want a round in the chamber, you have to have that permit. In essence, what that is that's the government saying that I have their permission to exercise my rights so long as I do it the way they tell me to. That's a violation of the Constitution. In other words, I think from a practical standpoint, they couch that under safety because they don't want anybody with a chambered round to shoot somebody else, and it just makes sense, right? Well, it doesn't. Because when seconds count and my life is hanging in the balance, I got to chamber a round before I use that gun to protect my life. Because here's the thing, if I'm a criminal in the state of Utah, I can guarantee you 125% I have a round in the chamber already. So that control or chipping away at our Second Amendment right actually puts people at risk. Those are the things that we need to stand against, and we can't relinquish those rights to the government.
Yeah, I think one of the problems I have with the way people look at the Second Amendment is that they view it as sports hunting, sporting clays, trap, target shooting, but that wasn't what the founders really intended. It was a stand against tyranny.
Exactly.
And the don't carry around in the chamber should be left up to the person carrying the weapon.
100% agree.
In my estimation. Because when the bad guy decides to do what he's going to do, and he's already decided, like you said, seconds count. And Utah, for instance, wants you to have 2 mechanical actions to fire that weapon. They want you to, in the case you're talking about, you'd have to chamber around, one action, pull the trigger. I guess if it's a revolver, cocking it would be one action, and pulling the trigger, I guess, would be the second. But it seems like the conversation always goes back to just having a rifle, and I'm going to go hunting. I came from I'm very blessed to be in Utah, but I came from an area back east that was considered one of the most dangerous in the country. And I don't think people realize that with the open borders and the immigration and what's coming, the gangs are terrible, but now they're international. So I'm glad Trump closed the borders. I'm glad that, but it's been 100 days. There's still 20-some million people in this country illegally. And many of them have ulterior motives. So for me, the Second Amendment right is critical to providing safety for my family. You know.
Yes. Well, that is part of the reason for the Second Amendment is to protect ourselves against a tyrannical government, but also just to protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I saw something recently on social media, and somebody had asked the question is, you know, if somebody breaks into your home, as an example, is it appropriate to shoot them before you make sure that they're armed, or they could be unarmed, right? Do you have to make that distinction before you take action? And I thought that was kind of almost couched in a ridiculous way, but you have to understand the context. First of all, you know, in our homes particularly, we have a massive expectation of privacy and safety. Mm-hmm. And if somebody breaks into your home, they are committing a felony act just by entering your home unlawfully. So I don't have time to try to discover if that person's armed or not. What it comes down to is, how do I feel about it? Do I feel that I'm in fear of serious injury or death? If I do, it's appropriate for me to take and use up through and including deadly force to extinguish that threat. And so sometimes there's a lot of missing context to the whole Second Amendment argument, the whole guns right situation. And I'm here to tell you, Jim, and I think you would agree with me 100%, the people making the rules and making the laws don't understand anything about firearms. And that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
So, and that's a challenge when you have people making laws and rules. They don't know the difference between a shotgun and a handgun, between a revolver and a semi-auto. And, you know, it's like some guns, because they might be scary looking, like the AR-15, they're almost weapons of mass destruction, for God's sake. When they aren't, it's a tool. And it means we have to protect ourselves. So it's very important to stand against these infringements on our rights. And there is a fine line. I mean, there needs to be some controls, but they should be extremely minimal to preserve our rights. I'm okay with background checks so long as those checks aren't also used to track us and document our information. And you know, because we shouldn't have mental health people that have serious mental health issues carrying guns. I get it. We shouldn't have criminals carrying guns. You know, and then the question is also, say you had committed a felony, had nothing to do with a firearm whatsoever, like white-collar crime. You do your time, you pay your debt to society. Should those rights be reinstalled?
There's a case in the Supreme Court right now where they're, I believe that they just ruled that if you were a nonviolent felon, they would restore your right to possess a firearm. You know, they did it for people with voting.
Right.
You know, I think the interesting thing to me with the Second Amendment is it's about the only right that the government federal government is continually pressing on restricting. All of the other bills, you know, all of other Bill of Rights items, that's not the case.
Right. Well, that speaks volumes to how much they hate guns, and they hate that because that is really maybe it's a symbol of our liberty in a certain way, and at the end of the day, we can't be controlled if we have our rights in place. And so what the government seems to do, and it's very consistent, their operation, the way they do things, and I'm talking about now not everybody in government, I'm talking mostly the left and the Democrats, but what they do is they spin false narratives. And the purpose for these false narratives is to do two things, really. It's to place people in fear and to remove their hope. Because if they can do those two things, and they've done that over our history, we have whole generations of people that have been placed in fear, their hope has been removed, and then the government comes in and puts them on a welfare program and gives them a pittance of what they could have if they would simply go out and do what they can do and what they have liberty to do in this country. And so the whole gun rights issue, the whole Second Amendment kind of says, hey, we're going to give you the tools you need to take care of yourself. You know, I think it's kind of almost a throwback to times in the past where, you know, something happened in the town and they'd go ring the town bell or the church bell, everybody come running with their pitchforks. Mm-hmm. They took care of themselves. They didn't call 911 and expect the police to show up. And so to a certain extent, I think we need to get back to that, Jim. We need to start protecting ourselves. We need to stand together as communities. I see it actually a lot of that here in Wasatch County, and I see a lot of that in Utah. And that stuff seems to be coming up. It seems to be a movement, if you will, that's happening in politics and other areas. And I really like that, you know, because law enforcement, yeah, God bless them for being here. But the problem with law enforcement is it might take them minutes to respond when seconds count. And so we have to take ownership of our own safety, the safety of our family, the safety of our neighbors, the quality of our schools. I mean, we get into a lot of things, but you know, we've all heard the saying that, you know, evil prevails when good men and women do nothing. And that couldn't be more true today.
Yeah, and I think when people say, you know, you're fine, you don't have to pay attention to it, it's not such a thing, they'll never get that passed. Canada, I think it was yesterday, was supposed to pass, I didn't check today if they did or not, but a new law that you can't have a weapon. So people are up in arms, they're talking about leaving Canada. And then you go to Britain. So Britain got rid of firearms. Police didn't even carry them, right? They have such trouble right now that the police are carrying firearms now. Mm-hmm. They also went out, now think this through. They banned firearms, and then because they had so many knife attacks, because bad people will find ways to do bad things.
We'll find a way.
That in London, if you possess a kitchen knife, you have to have the receipt for the day you were caught with the knife, that you had purchased it that day and you were returning it to your apartment or home. So that hasn't actually worked. Knife attacks aren't down. But the scariest thing outside of the self-defense is there's no freedom of speech. So they're arresting people for retweeting things that the government doesn't agree with. So there's people spending 1, 2, 3 years in jail because they retweeted or reposted on Facebook a meme that the government didn't like.
Yeah, that's a sad thing. You know, the byproduct of relinquishing our rights is also it leads to more government action to remove other rights. If they can do it in one area, they can do it in another. So, you know, I remember a time, Jim, and you probably do also, where you could go to the airport, jump on a plane without going through security. Yep. And then they had this thing, you know, we saw airplanes flying to buildings. It was shocking for all of us that experienced that. One of the most horrific things I've seen in my life, and I've seen a lot. And my position at that time was whatever it takes to ensure I never see this again is fine. And then they had something called the Patriot Act.
It's the worst thing ever.
And I was absolutely for it. I said, you know, George W., do your thing. You know, this has to stop. But you're right, it was the worst thing we could have done because we relinquished rights. And even today, look what we go through to get on an airplane. And I believe personally, most of that is unnecessary. You know, you don't need to have an 80-year-old grandmother and strip searching that person before they get on an airplane.
Right.
That person's not a terrorist. I'm not a terrorist. And so we have a process in our country, and we have laws and rules of order and things that we follow traditionally. And one of those things is that I have an expectation of privacy on my person and my belongings and my home. And you can't breach that without probable cause to believe that I've committed a crime. You have to establish that, and even go so far as go to a judge and submit that case and information to a judge. The judge can give you a warrant based on probable cause that you can serve on somebody to do a search.
Yep.
I don't know why it is we just accept the fact we go to an airport, they open your bag, they rummage through your underwear and your belongings with no probable cause to believe anything. That we're all criminals, we're all terrorists, we're all going to try to take down airplanes. We have relinquished a massive right that we will never get back. I don't think we'll ever stop having TSA, ever stop having the security checks. And that's just one example. Heaven forbid we ever see that happen with firearms or freedom of speech. Now, I will say, and it's another topic, but our freedom of speech is under attack.
It is.
And you say, well, in other countries, they post things on the internet and they're sanctioned for it or arrested or jailed. I would submit a lot of that happens here. We're not aware of it. We don't hear about it. The sanctions, yes. I could go tonight and do social media posts and say things that I believe are true, and there would be pushback, possibly from the government. But so again, if we lose rights in one area, we're going to lose them in other areas. Because every time the government takes away our rights, it empowers them and gives them more power.
So I'll give you a great example of that. The Supreme Court just had a case. A 57-year-old gentleman, his granddaughter, called the police and said that he was acting irrational and she wasn't getting her way. So they respond. Because it's domestic, and because of the red flag laws that they had in that state, they confiscated all of his weapons. No due process, just showed up and decided. He went to court. They said, oh, we're going to let this go. It wasn't correct. Child Services was notified. So Child Services shows up after the case is over and he's not found to have done anything improper. They confiscate his weapons again, won't give them back to him. The Supreme Court ruled that in a 9-0, which is pretty tough on a gun right to get all 9 justices to agree to it, that the government cannot expand its right to come and really violate the, the 14th Amendment? I think you're seeing pushback right now in the first 100 days. I think you saw the Biden administration put into play all kinds of things to take your rights away, or at least your right to own a firearm. In the bad area that I came from, I worked with the DOJ, Sheriff's Department, Gang Task Force, and they told me in no uncertain terms that if something were to happen, somebody broke into my house, somebody, accosted me, don't rely on the police. They said, look, we'll come. We're just not going to come in the time you need us to come. It might be 20 minutes,
Right.
To get there. And the crime's already happened. They also said the guy that's in your house has already decided what he's willing to do. So you need to have a plan of action. And that doesn't mean guns a-blazing every time somebody knocks on your door, but 3 a.m., somebody's in your kitchen that you don't recognize, it's probably worth a conversation.
Yes.
But what they said is, we'll catch him, we'll file a report, we'll draw a chalk line around the victim, But it was really up to you, and it was your responsibility
Right.
to take care of your family.
Well, Jim, there's a common misconception about law enforcement and security. Now, my wheelhouse is clearly security, although I've got extensive law enforcement experience. But think of it this way. There's two people standing in a mega church on a Sunday morning, sunny and warm outside in the summer. There's a security person and there's a police officer. Some guy walks in the door of the churches and he's wearing a long wool coat. Both people see that. The cop says, "That's very strange. It's warm outside. Why would somebody be wearing a coat like that? I'm going to keep my eye on them." And they do that until the person pulls out a gun or a rifle and starts shooting, and then we have dead people all over the place, and we have a lot of carnage. And then that police officer is going to default to their training. They're going to pull their sidearm, and they're going to extinguish that threat, possibly saving many lives. But many lives are gone. The security person, on the other hand, is going to see that same thing play out. They're going to say, "I think we have a problem here. Why would that guy be wearing a long wool coat on a sunny day like this?" The security person would walk up to the individual, shake their hand, and say, "Welcome to our church," give them a hug. They're checking for weapons. Say, "Sir, can I please take your coat? You're a guest. We want you to be comfortable, and I promise I'll get it back to you when you leave." They're being proactive about fixing a problem, potential problem, before it becomes a problem, where the police officer is being absolutely reactive. Now, if you look at the context of what law enforcement officers do, they need probable cause before they make an arrest. They need reasonable suspicion before they write a traffic citation. There always has to be something that prompts their action. Therefore, they are trained and their culture is nothing but reactive. Now, the fact they're out there is a good thing. It can be a deterrent. But that's the biggest difference between security and law enforcement. Law enforcement is largely reactive, where security is proactive. So we need to have a more proactive approach when it comes to us. Of course, the police are going to respond after they're called. The police are going to take action after something has already happened. But in that, say, active shooter situation, you can arrest that person, you can kill them, you can bring them to trial, you can bring them to justice, but there's nothing you can do that will ever replace the lives that are lost, the wounds and injuries that people will suffer for the rest of their lives, and the trauma that people that have been exposed to that will experience. You can't ever fix those things. So a proactive approach is always better. Anytime you're in a reactive state, you're always at a huge disadvantage. So, and I bring that up to point out the fact, we're talking about the Second Amendment. You know, somebody comes in my house that I don't know, that's not invited there, they've committed a criminal act. I don't have the luxury of playing police officer and building a case before I take action. I just have to use my best instincts, and I have to be proactive to save my family, to save myself, to save the sanctity of my home and my neighbors. So I think we all as a community should be more in a proactive state and thought process. Police are great. I love the police. But they have a certain role. And they're limited by what they can do because they do it under the color of authority, where we act based on how we feel and what we see and how we perceive things. So I think that's an important distinction. Now, if you get down to the local level, we elect leaders for a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one of our most precious rights. Voter integrity is in question nowadays, rightfully so. But the right to vote is critical to our country. It's critical to our well-being as citizens. And it's also something that needs to be protected. But we elect leaders for a reason, because we have a right to do that. Elected leaders are supposed to look out for our welfare. We choose them to do that. So on a county level, I'll just throw this out there, that I don't think there's any more important when we talk about safety and these kind of issues. No more important position than the county sheriff. It's an elected official that can have your back and be your gatekeeper and swears an oath to support and defend the Constitution. and should stand up for those things, best question you can ask your county sheriff is, are you a constitutional sheriff? And I think every citizen should make that appointment and ask their sheriff and see what their answer is. It might surprise a lot of people. But that's our gatekeeper in government, to protect all of us. And I believe that's their primary responsibility.
I think I'd go a step further. I think you can ask them, and you'll probably get lip service. Ask them to explain what they've done that shows they're a constitutional.
No, that's a great point. I've talked to many sheriffs, and I've asked them, "Are you a oh yeah, Paul, I'm a constitutional sheriff. Swear an oath, support, defend the Constitution." Give me one example of something you've done, to your point, that has supported and defended the Constitution. And without exception, they get deer in the headlights, and then they come back to the whole, well, I issued concealed handgun permits. And I say, well, is that actually constitutional? That I need the government's permission so I can exercise my right to carry, to protect myself from a tyrannical government? So it's not really constitutional.
Well, I always find it interesting that people say, oh, you shouldn't have that type of weapon because that's a military weapon. A musket was a military weapon in our country when it became a country.
Yes.
They had the same weapons that the British had.
Right.
So I don't buy into that so much, although I don't think everybody should have an F-16 in their driveway. I am encouraged with what I've seen since I got out to Utah, with 29 counties, all 29 said that they would be basically a sanctuary 2A county because they would uphold the defense of the Constitution,
right,
and that right. I think that right is very important. I think you've seen censorship in this country. We saw it through the elections for sure, and Elon was saw it as well and decided to do something about it. That's why we have any moniker of free speech, and even his platform's a little difficult. But I guarantee you, you take the right to own a firearm away from the populace, you got all kinds of trouble. In Britain, where they're arresting people and putting them in jail for their Facebook, it's not even theirs. They just forwarded it on.
Mm-hmm.
Who decides what shouldn't be said or who's offended? I personally believe everybody should be offended and you're doing it right. Because
right,
we can all sit down and talk about it and come to some mutual understanding. I do think that there's some changes coming. January 2025, Bondi and Patel were tasked with reviewing every law from 2021 to 2025 that was passed so that they could figure out what was really unconstitutional. And a good example of that is Biden put into place something called zero tolerance. Zero tolerance meant if you had an FFL, so you're a gun dealer, you own a gun store, and you made a clerical error on the paperwork. And I'm not saying I knew he was a cartel member, yeah, you're good.
right, right.
I'm just saying he forgot to check a box, they could shut his business down. Obviously, that's not great.
Right.
And one of the first actions that they took was to get rid of that. Trump also got rid of a anti-2A group that was from the White House. So they had a commission or department, and so they shelved that. And there's about 10 of those things that they've already identified because they had 30 days to do it, turn it in, figure out what they were going to do. So one of the things I like was right now in the state of Utah, you don't have to have a permit. You don't even have to be a resident of Utah to carry a gun. Mm-hmm. Can't have a round in the chamber unless you have a concealed carry permit. The advantage of a concealed carry permit is really twofold in Utah. One is I can travel outside the state. I can go to Montana, I can go to Alaska, I can go hunting, wherever, or just for my personal protection. Utah is recognized in, I think, 38 states. There's reciprocity.
36, 38, yeah.
Something like
a lot.
that.
Yeah.
I think the only one that's probably more is Arizona right now. Trump is pushing right now a federal reciprocity law. The individual states still get to set the rules of who and how and they issue those. However, if your state issues, it'll be reciprocal across every state in the union, which I think makes sense, but that's one of his initiatives, which I think, we might actually have a shot of getting. Mm-hmm. There is a website that people that are interested can go to called U.S. Concealed Carry. It's the USCCA, which is the United States Concealed Carry Association. They have a website. They have a reciprocity map. You put your state in, and your because it'll know what your CCW is and where it's reciprocal, and it will also tell you what state it's reciprocal in that may have additional regulations. So maybe Utah and Colorado are reciprocal, but Colorado wants you to be 21.
Right.
Whatever that is, but it's a good resource so you don't get yourself in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. But again, a right that definitely needs to be protected, and there's ins around, but we need to have a discussion. And what I would like to see less of is less of this back and forth, and there's no need to disagree with somebody and hate them. And there's middle ground sometimes, some places where there's not, but still, I believe there was a time in this country where we used to be able to have a discussion with all of the hate and stuff. And so, I'm a fan of accountability with compassion. If we lose the Christian compassionate component of how we deal with people in society, particularly in this country, our neighbors and folks, I think we lose a lot there too. So, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's a lot of work to be done. But again, if I could point out one thing that's characteristic, as I see, of the left, the Democrats particularly, is this spinning false narratives to make people afraid and take away hope. Today, I saw Chuck Schumer standing on the Senate floor, and he was talking about how evil this SAVE Act is, where people are required to prove, if they pass it, that you are a U.S. citizen to vote. And he equated that to Jim Crow. And I'm thinking, hold on for a minute. Don't we have to use ID to purchase alcohol? Don't we have to use ID to see an R-rated movie? We have to use ID to get on an airplane? But apparently we don't have to use ID to vote because that's racist. And it's the most ridiculous garbage I've ever heard in my life. But yet he stands up there year after year after year as if he's some kind of an authority. He should have been term limited out many, many years ago.
Yep.
And so this is it's idiocy on full display. And unfortunately, this is half of our government that's supposed to be advocating. And we see it on the local level too. But I saw that, and for me, it was shocking to see that kind of behavior. And we see it again and again and again. And, so I think what Donald Trump is doing is phenomenal. I think people are kind of impatient now because they're waiting for things to happen. But I believe with all my heart that Trump absolutely knows what he's doing. He's doing the right stuff. He's building a foundation. And then after the foundation is pristine and built well, then you'll see the house constructed. Because
I do think that, when people say, I can't believe there's not all these arrests already and all these, they have to build a case. They have to make sure that they're not, head hunting for the sake of head hunting. And I don't think it heals the country. But I do think that those people need to be held accountable. I think the Russia hoax, I think, you said something earlier about, since we're doing Second Amendment, try to bring it back to that. In California, my parents had lived out there for a little bit. their gun laws were determined by showing their legislature pictures on an overhead of various weapons. This one you couldn't have in California because it looked scary. It had black furniture. It was a black rifle. Put wood furniture on it, and same gun, same caliber.
Right.
That one's okay.
Right.
I walked into a gun store and I saw an unusual gun on the wall. It was an AK 47, and it was a pump action because of the laws they passed.
I need to go shopping with you. That sounds pretty cool.
Can you imagine getting, it made no sense. You can load your rifle, slap a magazine in it, and you must have a tool to remove it, or it's illegal. So, like you said, they don't actually know what they're talking about. And I think even the prior ATF, and if you're a 2A guy or you watch any content on it, the ATF came out to show how dangerous a Glock was, in a firearm, handgun. Of all the handguns that are out there, that's probably the easiest to break down. The ATF guy who was explaining it, the expert, couldn't break it down. Somebody had to come help him.
Oh my goodness.
If you're not a, gun person, it's the easiest thing everybody that owns one knows how to do it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that these people are making laws and these people are enforcing things that aren't. I think the Chevron doctrine that was overturned, for those of you who don't know, the government had a rule from the 50s that if an agency made a rule, not a law, but a rule, and you said, I want to take that to court, the court was instructed, whatever the agency said, they're the experts in the matter.
Right.
So they used the EPA, they used, I'm still blown away that 90% of the West is owned by the federal government. We're all scrambling around trying to find affordable housing. Phil Lyman said when he was running for governor, if we got 1% of that land back, we would double the available space to build on. And it would be good land to build on.
Right.
And that would reduce housing costs. But they don't want that. They want control. They want you to live off the largesse of the government, which gets doled out by people that decide what you're worth and what you get. And I think the Bill of Rights was brilliant, and it needs to be held to.
No, I couldn't agree more. How many government programs have you seen that have been successful and really helped? I'd rather be on my own and succeed on my own than take a pittance from the government. And the overspending, the abuse of resources, the unreasonable taxation. Property taxes is an issue that we face here in this county. And it's ridiculous. People are getting taxed out of their homes, and they pay their home off. They should own it. And then they're elderly on a fixed income, and they can't even afford to pay the taxes. So if you boil it all down, what that means is you're renting your property from the government. You never own it. And that needs to change. So there's a lot of things that should happen, and hopefully, from the top down, Trump will initiate things that will help those things happen. But there's a bottom-up component, and we can't underscore ever the importance of community involvement. Going to your school board meetings, going to county commissioners meetings, county council, city council, all those things. Water board meetings, anything. And just being involved. So. Anyway.
Well, at a local level, even Heber City area in Wasatch, the community got together and went and challenged ranked choice voting. They tried it in our county for, in Heber, anyway, the city, to elect their officials for, I think it was 2 years, and then it was supposed to go up. And so all of the representatives liked ranked choice voting because it kept them in power. So they got enough pushback from, the citizens. And it was only a very small percentage that took the time to actually make themselves heard. But you only need 1 or 2% of the people to stand up and say, hey, the rest of us feel the same way. And then you can get change done. So ranked choice voting was thrown out, which is fantastic because it's a way to fiddle with the votes.
Very good. Yes.
So is there anything you want to say to wrap up the Second Amendment?
Well, it's a conversation we need to have, and it's a precious right that we have. We don't want to lose, and I'm sure most people in Wasatch County would agree with me. But it's going to be a fight at some point. We're fighting many things on many levels, but I think the primary thing I'd like to leave this with, if I can, is just to let folks know that involvement is so important. And you're right; it takes a small percentage of people being involved to make a huge difference. And we have to be responsible and shoulder the responsibility of taking action on a local level. So I hope if that's the primary takeaway, that's what we bring home here. So okay. I know there is another thing that we're going to talk about. It's kind of interesting. Is there is a cell tower phone survey that we're going to talk about, and I guess there's an issue in the county as to whether cell towers should be 35 feet tall or 80 feet tall. It's a point of contention, and rightfully so. So that's an exciting thing we're going to discuss, and so I'm excited to hit that. There's also some other topics we'll be talking about.
So that was a great topic. Again, I love the Second Amendment. It was great to listen to you and Jim. Obviously, you know what you're talking about. So for the listeners and who are the Second Amendment people, lots of great information. So Paul, let's talk about just a couple of other things on our wrap up. HeberVote.com is basically a landing page that the producer of this is going to use to get some of really important surveys out. So one of them was the ranked choice voting. That's another podcast all in itself. You and I are really passionate about getting out the corruption and getting back to hand count paper ballots. But you and Jim both talked about the importance of the involvement in the community. And you are exactly right, because with the involvement that other people did behind the scenes, and I have to just say some powerhouse women friends of mine.
Yes.
We were able to sweep in Heber the ranked choice voting where they voted that they weren't going to move forward 5-0. Now, Scott, who basically started that off, basically said there were other important things that they needed to go after. And one of those things, because obviously I'm here in the health and wellness field, is really the importance of, how do we protect our children? How do we protect our grandchildren? Not that I don't want to protect you and I, or the elderly, the grandparents. We're both grandparents, and just going to put that out there. But I think that everything that's going on, especially with RFK and what he's going on, is the importance of the health of our children. We are a sick, sick nation. And just the brain emotional issues alone, the ADD, the ADHD, the social phobias, the anxiety, the depression, all of the stuff that there's an uptick. A lot of it had to do with the COVID, the mask mandates, the mandatory shots, going to school from Zoom, where these children need social interaction. But one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is really protecting the health of our children. And there is a new, and don't 100% quote me on my words, because I'm not very political. You can ask me about Roundup, you can ask me about other herbicides, you can ask me about heavy metals, and I'll talk all day long.
Right.
But I'm not like really very political. But we went to a Heber City Council meeting that it was actually the planning commissioners, and I was there with Jamie Hewlett, and there were some other people there. And basically what we ended up hearing is that there is a new proposed bill going on. So we have one existing law where it really talks about the cell towers and the height. So we all know that the science is out there. It's not just RFK, it's not Green Med Info, it's not Children's Health Defense, it's just not me. There's other doctors, health practitioners, scientists, psychiatrists that are talking about the harm that RF, radio frequency exposure, does to your immune system, to the body, especially to the brain. So when we were at this meeting, actually, Jamie came very well prepared in our podcast last week. There was a letter that was sent to the Heber City Council, and I guess I found it a little bit offensive. It has a lot to do with the FCC laws, but there was a letter, and basically what the letter from the attorney said is, accordingly, we urge you to expressly identify in your hearings on APC's application that you are legally prohibited from considering evidence concerning alleged effects of RF emissions. So that's a letter from the city's attorney that they're prohibited. So then we come back and we start doing more research, and it really comes down to the FCC. So they basically don't care about our health. So what Heber is planning on doing is, right now, existing cell towers are 35 feet. Okay, 35 feet, you can't get a lot of devices in 35 feet, and no one wants to be the bottom. As they said that in the Planning Commission with Jamie Barron, who basically said also nobody wants to be at the bottom. So what they're doing is they're taking that 35 feet. The plans were to raise it to 100 feet. By the end of the meeting, they passed it 5-0, that they were going to move it on to City Council at 80 feet. So we got to ask a question. I asked the question, I actually made a comment, and I basically just said, I want people to know about the dangers. Most people aren't going to turn their microwave on, cook their food for 7 hours, and stand with their brain in front of it. Why? Because I think most people know that it's going to do so harm, because it's labeled that it has some harmful effects on it. But the cell towers are often overlooked. Why? Because we all want technology fast. We want it now. As soon as we start losing our cell signal, we want to voice our opinion of, how it's so slow. We can't watch our YouTube. We can't watch, any of the shows that people are watching on iPads. Anyway, long story short, they passed 5-0 to move it to the City Council to raise the cell towers to 80 feet. So then I asked, how many more devices are going to be attached to that? Because now you have all of that additional footage for the high man who's got the most money to say, I want to be on top. And then nobody again wants to be low man on a totem pole, but they'll take what they can.
Right.
So when we're talking about this, and we know that it's harmful effects, and it just chaps my butt that I guess they're not going to allow public comment because they don't care about the health. So they can't talk about it. But it goes back to, we can't talk about it if it destroys the landscape of Wasatch, being able to see the temp, being able to see the Wasatch Mountains, being able to see whatever trees are growing, and it's still going to be close to some residentials, even if they put it at the Wigglish toy store. There's a whole RV park behind there that people live there month after month, and some live year round. So the website, which is, I always forget this, Hebervote, Hebervote.com. these surveys are going, and there's a really important one on trying to inform and educate the citizens here in Heber so that the city council can say, nope, we don't want it here. We don't want to raise it to 100 feet. We need to keep it at 35 feet. Or maybe if you do want to raise it to 50, 60, 70, 80 feet, maybe you need to push it away from places like Valley Hills over by Smith's,
Right.
halfway between Red Ledges, or move it away from the Wiglish, where there's that RV park that people will live there all year round. But just to wrap this up, and I know that was kind of long-winded, but I think that people need to know that KMMU, particularly our podcast where we're talking, it's meant to get unfiltered truth in Wasatch, because there's nowhere we can go. The Salt Lake Tribune's corrupt. I think it's KCPW, they're corrupt. You know, you can't get the unfiltered truth anywhere, but that's what you and I are going to be doing, and you and others. But long-winded talk, because I think it's important, and I know the producer behind the scenes of KMMU.org is really excited about kind of moving some of these surveys forward. Just give me a little bit of perspective on how you feel that the health of the people who live here in the Valley, the health of our children, the health of our grandchildren, the health of our grandparents. What's your perspective on, one, what you're seeing, and your perspective on health?
Well, I can tell you, Lori, there's nothing more significant than health. And I'm 63, and I'm not like I was when I was 20, for sure. But one thing kind of in the background that I have experiences that are happening as we speak and have over the last week, I got with you and said, how can I be more healthy? How can I make better, more healthy decisions with the food that I eat, the things that I do, the supplements, the whole battery. And you've been a blessing to me, because I've been doing that for literally days, and I feel so much better. And I think part of the thing is to get people healthy, and I believe in that. But to have to be educated. And so when I see a lot of these things happening, there's always a tipping point. There's a balancing act that happens. Yeah, we want fast internet. We want technology. But there's always a equal and opposite reaction to those things. So it has to be on a certain plane. It has to be balanced and organized. And I can't work all the time. I need rest periods. I need
Right.
enjoyment time. Or why would I work, right? But I do need to work too. I mean, so there's a balance that you have to have. And I think, so where is that balance? I don't know. But what I would like people to do is go to these surveys, participate in local government. And I'm very collaborative, and I believe that's a great process. But it's hard to be collaborative if people aren't plugged in and involved.
Right. Agreed.
So my message is get involved. So you can be part of the solution. You can have your voice heard, and you can, where's that line? You know, that's all of us to have our voices collectively to determine where that's at. For me, I think health is very important. I've heard it said many, many times, if you don't have your health, whatever else you have doesn't really matter.
Right.
And I've just decided that, whatever time God blesses me with on this God's green earth is, I would rather be healthy and productive than sick and crippled. And I think so many of the maladies that we face simply because of neglect or misunderstanding or, things that we do we don't understand. But it's important to have a say, like cell towers. Where's the line? They get 80 feet, then they got 100, then they got 120, and then it's how many of them can we put
Exactly.
in, and it snowballs.
Yeah. So how would you feel if they put a cell phone tower by the police station right on top of the roof? Or better yet, that new fire department. How do you think that would affect the health of the firefighters, the health of our police officers?
Well, I can tell you, if I was, in charge of those outfits, where I was chief of police or sheriff or anybody else, I wouldn't allow that to happen because I would owe it to my people to ensure that they're taken care of and their safety, their welfare, their health is taken care of. So I wouldn't allow that to happen. I wouldn't want it in my backyard. I wouldn't want it on my neighbor's roof. And quite frankly, and maybe this is more of an emotional thing, this place is so beautiful. I don't want to look at the stupid things.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
I realize that as a reasonable citizen in Wasatch County, I have to sometimes say, okay, I'm willing to accept a little bit or something here or something
Right.
there for the sake of technology. I understand, I get it. It's not all or nothing. But again, when you're dealing with government, you give them an inch, they'll take a yard. We've seen it time and time and time again. We have to protect against that. I heard a saying once I really, really like, and it goes something like this. It says that, I'll kill the wolf that killed my sheep, but I'm going to understand him too. If the wolf must die to protect my sheep, so be it. But I'm going to understand, and I'm not going to hate the wolf because I understand that that's what is his nature to be. And so when I relate that to things like this, I think, well, we have to understand the nature of people, the nature of government, the nature of things the way they are. And we need to remove hate and emotion a lot of times from these discussions and look at the practicalities, consider other people's concerns.
True.
But again, it gets back to the whole local government thing and participation. If we don't all participate, I don't know what other people's views are, where they're coming from, what filters they're viewing things through. And so there has to be some way to get people to participate. If we do that, I believe, particularly in Wasatch County, there's a lot of intelligence, there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in people in this county. And if we bring that all together under one roof or one circumstance, there's not a problem, not one we can't solve or find a reasonable solution. But we can't leave it up to government because I promise you that they are not looking after our interests. And so we have to take care of ourselves with that regard. And I think that happens with participation. Health is critical. Health is possibly the number one thing that we have. And we have to look after the health of our citizens. We have to inform them and educate them. Now, if an educated citizen decides they want to do something that's not healthy, then they have that right. They have that liberty to make those lifestyle choices. But I'd like them to be informed. I don't want something happening to them where they wake up one day, how'd this happen to me? And guess what? It's because of that tower, and you had an opportunity to go and talk to city council about that. You didn't do it. And so they just did that. And then you're not making an informed choice. You're not able to exercise your freedom of speech because you were unaware.
Right. I love that as a wrap up. Leighton, the website for going straight to that survey is hebervote.com / EMF survey. So hebervote.com / EMF survey. This is your chance to speak up. This is your chance to get involved, like Paul and Jim were saying. And I always say, listen, it takes courage to stand. It's easy to bury your head in the sand and hope it's going to go away, but it's not going to go away. The only way that it's going to go away is if we have community participation. We are better in numbers. We are better with good people behind us. I think that's why you were probably such a badass Marine back in your day.
Yes.
But that's what we need. So again, go take a look at that survey. If you have any questions, you need to get a hold of us, you can send us an email at info@PoisonedPower.com. You can send me a personal email at lgagan, Gagan, at lucky2beme.org. That's lgagan at lucky2beme.org. Paul, if somebody, you're going to have a website coming pretty soon.
Yes,
So
we're
we can-
working on that. and we haven't got it nailed yet, but when we do, I'll make that announcement. There's just so much information to put out to folks, and I want to be very active in doing that. Again, I love this community. I love Wasatch County. Heber City is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Others are good too, but this is where my heart is. But I want to be a part of doing the right thing and being active in my community. So when we get that up, I'll
That's
announce
awesome. So good night for now. Send us an email. Again, take a look at hebervote.com/EMF survey. That's where we rolled out the ranked choice voting. We won that. We swept it 5-0. We're hoping to get that for the extended tower from 35 feet to 80 feet. Remember, it's going to not only affect your health, it's going to affect the views of Wasatch. And Lord knows, we have enough cell towers to look at. Look at that one on Main Street on the building. It's like the ugliest thing when you're driving down Main Street. We don't need any more, but it takes the citizens to show up. So take a look at City Council meeting. It's not going to be this Tuesday. I think it's the Planning Commission, but I think it's going to be the following Tuesday. But you really never know because sometimes they sneak a little bit of things in. So always going on Monday and taking a look. But good night for now, and we look forward to next Thursday.
Yes.
All right.